So I don't know if you've ever been through a situation before where you have lost your mojo. So, and here's what I mean by that is about 2 months ago, I received a diagnosis of having high blood pressure and dipping my toe into diabetes. And once I got that diagnosis, man, I began to work hard. And exercising, I became consistent in that, seeing some changes happen in that way. And in the process, I lost 15 pounds, doing that. And then, you know what happened? Vacation happened. And after we came back from vacation, I've still run a little bit, but it's still nothing like it was before I left going on vacation. And I've also hit the up and down yo-yo. You know what that is, right? I step on the scale, it lies. I step on the scale again, it tells the truth. Then it lies, then it tells the truth. So it's one of those things like I gain, I lose, I gain, I lose. But I'm still nowhere close to where I was before, so praise God for that. But it's just one of those things, like we've been through certain situations, and many of us have been through that, where we have lost our mojo. Right now the talk of the athletic world is Simone Biles and Naomi Osaka. And for those of you that may be unfamiliar with them, Naomi Osaka is a famous tennis player. I think she was #1 in the world at the time when she decided to take a break from the French Open because she wanted to just take care of some mental things. She felt like she needed to take a mental health break. And then, of course, this week, that's also been the conversation with Simone Biles and with the Olympics, where she dropped out of the team competition, and then she dropped out of the all-around individual competition. And it was for the same reason. She said for mental health issues. And people have gone back and forth on what they think about, the choices that they made. But here's something that's really interesting. There's a guy named Michael Rosenberg, and he writes for Sports Illustrated. And here's what he said about the whole thing. He says, "We watch sports partly to see people do what we can't, but we also watch to see people be who they are. What you have seen from Biles and Osaka this year was not necessarily them at their best, but them at their truest." So it's a very interesting perspective. And like I said, people go back and forth on what they feel about, the whole process and their whole response. And I'm not here to judge anyone about, wherever they land at in that. However, I do think that it's possible for us to look at those two lives and just begin to ask ourselves, how much is that like me? Like, where am I at in my life? Like, have I hit a point where I feel overwhelmed? Have I hit a point where I feel like I need to step back for my mental health? Have I hit a point where I feel like I'm running on empty? Have I hit a point in that way? And no doubt, I think if I were to do a survey for those that are watching online and for those of you that are here, asking a simple question of how many of you feel overwhelmed, I wonder how many hands would go up. How many of you feel stressed out? I wonder how many hands would go up. We could just go through the list of all of those elements of people who are wrestling, who are struggling. How many of us would raise our hands? How many of us, even just this simple question, how many of us feel busy as all get out? Right? Just look and stand, raise both hands. Yeah. How many of us feel busy as all get out? And with that, so what do we do with that? How do we navigate that? How do we manage that? And let me tell you, here's the truth. One of the best ways for us to look at how to navigate that is to look at how Jesus did it. Because on our busiest day, it still doesn't compare to probably Jesus' least busiest day. It says in Luke chapter 5, he got up that morning, and then he went, and he sat on a boat. He taught a group of people. Then he told the guy who owned the boat, hey, take us out. Let's catch some fish. And then a miracle catch happens. So then they come back, and then he asked that person to become his disciple. And so they do. And then later on, it talks about him healing a person of advanced leprosy. Not just leprosy, but advanced leprosy. So odds are this person, because of this leprous disease, maybe had limbs falling off. Right? I mean, it was something really significant where Jesus heals that guy. And then, not only that, it says that vast crowds after that came to him to hear him preach and to be healed by him. And then the next day, he gets into a debate with the religious leaders of that time. He also heals a person that's a paralytic. Oh, and by the way, he calls another disciple. So we're talking about someone who is busy, busy, busy. Matter of fact, it says this in Mark chapter 3, verse 20. It says, one time Jesus entered a house, and the crowds began to gather again. Soon he and his disciples couldn't even find time to eat. How many of us have been that busy? Or you haven't had time to eat? I haven't had very many of those. You can see, I'll find a way. Where there's a will, there's a way. But many of us can identify with that, with being so busy we don't have time to eat. And it actually says it again in Mark chapter 6. It says, 6 verse 31. It says, then Jesus said, let's go off by ourselves to a quiet place and rest a while. He said this because there were so many people coming and going that Jesus and his disciples didn't even have time to eat. Didn't even have time to eat. So that's another example. This wasn't the same instance. This was another instance later where they were just so busy that they didn't have time to eat. So Jesus does. He identifies with the busy, with the hectic, with the crazy life. But the question is, how did he navigate that? And we're given a glimpse into that when we look at Luke chapter 5, verse 16, where it says, but Jesus often withdrew to the wilderness for prayer. Jesus often took time to disconnect from the hectic, from the crazy, from the busy, to reconnect with his dad. To reconnect with his dad. So in that, what we do is we begin to recognize how valuable, if Jesus needed a moment of refreshment, how much more do we need it? If Jesus needed a moment to get away from the craziness, to go out and just talk to his dad and reconnect with him and just refresh himself spiritually, then how much more do we need it? Then how much more do we need it? There's a book that our staff, we read together, called The Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, written by a guy named Peter Scazzaro. And there was something that he said in that book that really stood out to me, and I wanted to read it to you. He says, as Parker Palmer said, and you can read this right along on the screen, self-care is never a selfish act. It is simply good stewardship of the only gift I have to offer others. And then it goes on to say, anytime we can listen to true self and give it the care it requires, we do it not only for ourselves, but for the many others whose lives we touch. So there's nothing wrong with taking a moment for self-care. There's nothing wrong. We're launching a brand new series today called Solution. Soul, S-O-U-L, Lucian. Now, I know that misspells solution. I know that. But it's a play on words. See, when we think about a solution is something that we turn to try to fix a problem, to try to navigate a circumstance or a situation. So here's the truth. With our souls, we also need to figure out how do we navigate so that we can have our souls be filled. How do we do that? How do we allow ourselves, and the subtitle of this message is Reconnect with What Really Matters. So we're looking at being able to refresh our souls. So we have a sermon illustration that I wanted to utilize today for us to be able to take a look at. And so if we think of ourselves as a pitcher, what we do is we're filled. Is we have that which is in us to be able to give to others. But the truth is, if you have kids, you're giving out to others. If you work, you're giving out to others. If you volunteer, you're giving out to others. And then as we continue on, as we begin to invest in the lives of others, we're constantly pouring out. And eventually what will happen is if we don't connect with what really matters, eventually we will find ourselves what? Empty. Empty. And so again, the question is, how many of us are running on empty? How many of us are running on empty? And then the question that we have to ask ourselves then is, what do I turn to fill my soul? Because many of us, we turn to something to try to fill our soul. And some of the examples that we've given in the past, we say sometimes we'll turn to money, or we'll turn to relationships, we'll turn to sex, we'll turn to success, we'll turn to position, we'll turn to fame. We'll turn to things that will try to bring us, and we're trying to satisfy our souls. We're trying to fulfill our souls. But here's the thing that's really important to keep in mind. Yesterday, I was doing some errands, and one of the things that I did was Heidi's car needed to be cleaned, because you notice Heidi's not here today. She's going to a bridal shower for one of our cousins. And she's like, you know what, I want my car to be clean when I go to the bridal shower. And plus, we have 4 kids. So even if you have one kid, you know how hard that could be on your car. So I took the car to get it clean. But before I took it to where I was going to get it cleaned, I stopped at another gas station because their gas was 50 cents cheaper. And right now, 50 cents is huge, right? So that's like $1 every 2 gallons that you're saving. So that's huge. So I went to this gas station, and while I was there, I was thinking, like, man, I am so thirsty. I am so thirsty. So I walked into the while I was pumping, while the gas was pumping, and I just started looking through to see what they had in a convenience store, and it was at the right there on 182nd. Look, Snapple has a new drink called Mango Madness. Not just mango, but Mango Madness. So I was like, man, I have to check this out, plus I'm really thirsty. So I grabbed that drink, paid my $1 or whatever for it, and my gas was done. So then I got back in the car, and I was driving to the next gas station where I was going to wash Heidi's car. And as I'm driving, I start to drink, and I'm telling you, man, it's delicious. It is absolutely delicious. Love it. Love it. So I'm drinking, finishing. And then when I'm done, I'm going through the washer, the car washer thing where you sit in, going over. So I'm going through that. And as I'm going through, it hits me like, man, I'm thirsty. Matter of fact, I'm more thirsty now than I was before I stepped onto Mango Madness. I am thirsty. And I wonder, for many of us, how many times we try to fill our soul, and at the end of it, what we settle for is life's Mango Madness. Where at the end of it, we still feel thirsty. We still feel hungry. Now, there are things that we'll turn to, but there are certain things that we know we shouldn't, right? We know that we shouldn't turn to murder. It's kind of a given, because murder will kind of mess up your life. Well, we know that we shouldn't turn to adultery. Like, that's really bad to try. So we know that. We know that we shouldn't turn to stealing. Like there's certain things that on the battle, is that a word, battlesphere? But you know what I mean. On the badometer, But there's certain things that we'll look at, we'll go, nah, that's not what I should do to try to find my fulfillment. But I came across a passage that many of you may be familiar with. And as I was preparing for this message, it just kind of stuck out to me in a different way. It says in Matthew chapter 4, verse 3, realize at this point Jesus had been fasting for 40 days and 40 nights. So it says in Matthew chapter 4, verse 3, during that time the devil came and said to him, if you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become loaves of bread. Tell these stones to become loaves of bread. So, and I love the initial challenge. if you are the Son of God. Like, Satan, who are you? But if you are who you claim to be. Just before this, he said, this is my son in whom I am very well pleased. If you are who you claim to be, tell those stones to become bread. Now, here's the truth. Let's be honest. On the scale of bad things, how does bread rank? Like if you had a friend that called you and said, man, I need to confess to you. I blew it this week. You'd be thinking, oh man, what's going on? What happened? And he says to you, I just have to confess to you. I ate some sourdough bread. You'll be like, what? Click. Right? That's the worst. So here's the thing that I'm getting at is sometimes the things that we turn to fill our soul, it's like that bread. And we look at it as it's not evil, it's not bad, but the truth is it's just not satisfying. And that's why Jesus responds in Matthew chapter 4, verse 4, where he says, but Jesus told him, no, the scriptures say people do not live by bread alone, but by what? Every word from the mouth of God. Every word from the mouth of God. So Jesus says, look, Satan, I'm not going to choose the counterfeit. I'm not going to choose the thing that will not really fill me. I'm not going to choose the thing that will not really satisfy me. I'm choosing to live on the words of my Father. I'm choosing to live on the words of my Father. And so that's where we have to begin to look and ask ourselves, because in order for our souls to be filled, we really have to go to the source of what fills it. We really have to go to the source of what fills it. Now, this is also the important thing, too, is the way that a pitcher works. Is a pitcher just a container? No. Matter of fact, if I fill, and I'm not going to do this right now because I don't want to make a big mess, but if I were to take this water, turn it over, and begin to fill the pitcher without emptying the pitcher, what happens to the pitcher? It begins to overflow. Matter of fact, it begins to make a mess. You weren't designed to just receive either. You are designed to be filled and to give. To be filled and to give. That's how you are designed. That's how you're designed. And so then the question that we have to ask ourselves is, well, Ken, if that's how I'm designed, if that's how I am made, then what do I do in order to bring me to that place where I meet my design and I begin to pour out what the Father has poured into me? And I begin to become filled by what the Father fills me with. So here's what we're doing for this series that we're doing called Solution. And I hope that you will join us for this entire series. Because what we're going to do is we're going to be looking at spiritual practices, spiritual disciplines. And here's what we're going to do with it, is each week we're going to dig into why the practice is so important. So that's what's going to happen in the message. Then what I want to encourage you to do is during the series is to listen to the podcast. Because on Sundays, we're going to talk about why they're so important. And then during the week when the podcast is released, we're going to talk about how to do those spiritual disciplines and to get the most out of them. So make sure that you tune into both over the course of this series. And only 1 week over the course of the podcast we may extend because we do have I have a special guest coming in. They're going to interview and talk about discipline and how to develop that into our lives. But I think it's so important for us to do. And then here's what we're going to do. Is we've been announcing, right, on our website, we're going to launch a new link called Next Steps. And so what we're going to do over the course of this series is the messages and the podcasts are going to be the material that we'll put together to create the new link. And so hopefully by the time this series is done, or maybe not too long afterwards, depending on how much editing needs to be done, we'll be launching that new link on our website. But with this in mind, it's so important for us to begin to look into the spiritual disciplines. Because how many of us, when we hear the word spiritual discipline, yay! And we like, oh, Ken, I can't wait. Notice, just imagine if the youth leaders would have said, hey, kids, we're going to go to a discipline park. Not an amusement park. We're going to go to a discipline park. What kind of turnout do you think we would have been full today? All the kids would have been here. Because when we think of discipline, we don't necessarily see it as fun. We don't necessarily see it as fun. But here's one of the things that you'll find. And one of the arguments that I used to make is I am not a disciplined person at all. I used to make that argument. Until I really went back and I began to analyze my life. And here's the truth. I'm very disciplined. I'm very disciplined. Just ask Netflix. Just ask Amazon Prime how disciplined I am. I mean, you've done this too. You see that show, come on, and then you begin to watch it, and you know. So I can be disciplined when I want to be. It's just not properly applied discipline. Now, again, I'm not saying television is evil, but maybe sometimes television can be bread. Sometimes it can be bread. But I'm not necessarily saying that it's evil or that it's wrong, and I'm not saying that it's bad to watch television. But all I'm saying is when we claim to not be disciplined, maybe we deceive ourselves. And I'll be honest, I was deceiving myself in making the claim that I'm not disciplined. So now it's just a matter of learning how to, reappropriate? Is that the right word? Reapportion? Change. It's time for me to change the way that I do my discipline. So I've been in the process of doing that. But I just wondered, how many people in our church could this encourage and uplift? And for us to begin to recognize the value of spiritual discipline in our lives and the necessity for us to begin to connect with God and seek him out. There's another book that I read called Spiritual Disciplines of the Christian Life by a guy named Donald Whitney. And he said this, and I love this. Why do we need the spiritual disciplines? He says, the God-given means by which busy believers, how many does that describe? Amen? By which busy believers become like Christ. God offers life-changing grace to every believer through the spiritual disciplines. God offers life-changing grace. He offers himself. It's a way for us to become like Christ. And so, again, the whole series, we just did a previous series where we talked about becoming. And we're looking at becoming like Christ and love up, love out, love in. We're looking at all those elements of our lives. Well, the best way for us to do that is through the spiritual disciplines and to create space in our lives for us to practice them. He also said this in his book, and I thought this was really great too. He said, discipline means to prevent everything in your life from being filled up. Discipline means that somewhere you're not occupied and certainly not preoccupied. Love that. And then he goes on to say, in the spiritual life, discipline means to create that space in which something can happen that you hadn't planned or counted on. See, it's when you put yourself in the position where you're practicing your spiritual disciplines where the impossible can happen, where change can happen. I'll tell you this. If you begin to practice your discipline, every time you open your scriptures, it's not going to be a moment. It's not. Not every time you pray, you're going to feel a deep and intimate connection with God. Not every time you come to church, Well, actually, every time you come, the messages will be incredible. No. But not every time that you come to church, the messages will speak to you that way. It's not always the case. But you know why we do it? It's for that one moment. It's for that one time. And trust me, it will be more than one. But what you do is you create space in your life for those opportune moments for God to work, for God to move. But that's the beauty of discipline, is you never know when God is going to show up. You never know when God is going to do something incredible. You never know when God is going to speak. You never know when God is going to move. So what you do is you make yourself available to him and seeking him so that when the timing is right and when he decides to move, you are available for him to move in. You're available for him to move in. So why the spiritual so important? The spiritual discipline so important? Spiritual disciplines give us the opportunity to face our shadow. And the truth is, every single one of us have one. We all have a shadow. Now, I don't know how wide and how long your shadow is, but we all have one. And spiritual disciplines allows us to face them. Spiritual disciplines also remind us, God, I can't do this without you. It reminds us of our dependence upon him and who he is. Spiritual disciplines also allow us the opportunity to have incredible encounters with God in our lives. So that's my prayer. My prayer is that this series will inspire you to begin to look at your life and say, hey, how can I carve out my life so that God has room to work in me? How can I do that? And actually do that. Like, pick up your schedule and begin to say, I'm carving this time out for God, to be with him, spend time with him. So here's the main point of the message today, and here's what I really want you to walk home with. And that is, the heart of discipline is to pursue only what deepens or deeply satisfies my soul. The heartbeat of discipline is to only pursue what deeply satisfies my soul. It's to only pursue what truly fills me so that I can again begin to give out and love others the way that God has called me to. It's amazing how this process will allow us to come alive spiritually. Father, I thank you. I thank you for the way that you speak. I thank you for the way that you draw us. And Lord, I just want to take this time out to pray this morning for those who are watching and for those who are here. That this morning will be an opportunity just to be reminded of your heartbeat, of your love, of your presence. And Father, I pray that this is also an opportunity for us to look at ourselves, to be able to say where in my life and begin to exercise the discipline necessary, to begin to carve out time that we'll begin to spend with you, to prioritize time that we will spend with you. Father, I thank you for your mercy and your grace. And I just pray that we become that much more aware of who you are. And all these things we ask in your name.